Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I guess I'm talking about the new album from Swedish House Mafia, Paradise Again. Well, I'm about as surprised that this exists as you are. Swedish House Mafia is the trio of producers Axwell, Sebastian Ingrosso, and Steve Angello, some of the first artists to score big hits on the EDM scene and help usher in that big festival style of EDM that really flourished throughout the 2010s decade, and especially the early half of it. But they were a really short-lived collective at that. They were only together for a span of like 4 years, from I think 2008 to 2012. And they released a total of 6 original songs before breaking up. And I'll be blunt, I was not a fan. Never have been. Some may recall eons ago when I put out my ever-infamous Eric Prydz review and briefly went into a ranting digression on them after hearing Prydz technically once counted as a member of the collective, albeit missing out on the detail that he was only a part of the group during their early formation and had no contributions to the music subsequently released under the name. In retrospect, kind of a shame. Prydz clearly has much more cred and talent as a producer than the other three ever did, but yeah. Yeah, I've always considered Swedish House Mafia to fall within the same bucket of, like, big radio pop EDM producers from that time, like David Guetta, Calvin Harris, Steve Aoki, and especially Avicii, R.I.P. Though despite the similarities in their musical styles, Swedish House Mafia never had the same reputation of being a walking punchline back in the day, at least not nearly the same extent. And for whatever reason, it feels like, especially since they reformed in 2018, there was a bit of a reappraisal for them, and they now enjoy more critical acclaim than they ever did back in their original run. And I would not really be able to tell you what brought that on. I've revisited their old songs, and my opinions have not fundamentally changed. I think their big hit, Don't You Worry Child, is okay. Has a good tune, carries that big anthemic feel of this era of EDM. I understand why it would really resonate with people, but I always thought the guest singer, John Martin, sounded terrible, and like he was half vomiting through his delivery. I guess their tracks Antidote with Knife Party and Greyhound are passable too, though I straight up did not even like their tracks Save the World, One, or Miami to Ibiza. I find all 6 of these tracks to be pretty dull, and I suspect a big chunk of their hype came from their mystique and the fact that they had so little to their name before breaking up and going on giant farewell tours to mark the occasion. Not so much because the music itself was actually that interesting. I may still not care for Avicii even after his passing, but I still easily understood why he was revered as much as he was. I do feel like he was legitimately trying his best to, like, be more out of the box and try a whole bunch of weird genre mashups within his otherwise radio-friendly sound. Swedish House Mafia, I guess I can respect for helping lay the groundwork for the popular sound of EDM around that time, but I don't really feel like I can go any farther than that. So when I heard that they were releasing an entire debut album here, I think you can imagine I wasn't exactly going out of my mind with anticipation. I already knew they had that comeback single with The Weeknd that's become a minor hit over here, but now they were really confirming their presence was here to stay with the full-on studio album, and a big one at that, 17 tracks adding up to over an hour. I probably wouldn't have thought to cover this at all, to be honest, but of course I got a bunch of requests to cover it, like, immediately after it dropped, so okay, fine, I guess I'll check it out for the sake of getting some extra views. I did hear the album marked a change in direction away from big bombastic festival EDM towards comparatively more stripped-back classic-style house arrangements, and that at least sounded like it could be somewhat more interesting. Maybe I might even enjoy this? And as it turns out, no, not really. No, by my ears, this is the same old Swedish House Mafia we've always known. I mean, it's true they have slightly changed their sound in the direction of some more stripped-back classic deep house, but it's not nearly as drastic a shift as some have made it out to be. It's still a very radio-friendly blend of it that's still very bright and flashy and fits alongside their past work. Much closer to the likes of Galantis than to Mr. Fingers. And whatever change in sound there is feels more like a correction to the sound of the scene itself having changed in the past decade, and an effort to fit in more with what's currently trendy. I've actually seen some fans call this album a sellout, which is kind of hilarious to me, as if there was ever an experimental bone in any of these guys' bodies to begin with. I guess there is some logic to that reaction, because, you know, like, back then they were helping set popular trends, and now they're just kind of following them. But to me, no, this is, like, exactly as interesting and cutting edge as the stuff they'd put out in their prime. Which is to say, this album is pretty much a front-to-back snooze fest. I don't feel like burning hatred towards it or anything, but there's also very little I found myself, like, enjoying. It's just all very dull for the most part. I guess the album doesn't start out too bad. The first two tracks, Time with Mappe and Heaven Takes You Home with Connie Constance, they're fairly run-of-the-mill pop house bangers, but they have decent enough grooves and tunes to work fine. Nothing special, but nothing objectionable. They're decent. I do kind of like the classical piano interlude provided by Jacob Mulerod as well. It's nice. And aside from that, I suppose I was surprised by how much I got into Lifetime with Ty Dolla $ign and 070 Shake. Thought that track probably had the best and most memorable hook of any track on the album, and it has a nice, satisfyingly crunchy 80s-ish backbeat behind it. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but it's pretty good. And I'll say I liked the instrumental cut Home. That one had some lower key and more intimate piano progressions with a few nice vocal samples echoing out on top of it. That was nice as well. And, those 5 cuts are the only ones that elicited a positive leaning reaction. The vast majority of this stuff just didn't elicit much of any reaction at all. There's a few cuts that feel like they're ready-made as radio singles. The track with The Weeknd, it's disappointingly bland and sounds like he totally phoned it in. There's a straight hip-hop track with A$AP Rocky that feels totally out of place, but we gotta have that crossover check. I guess it's not terrible either, but again, it's just weird to hear that there. I guess Don't Go Mad with Seinabu Say, or however you say that, sorry. It's inoffensive enough, but didn't really stick out to me either. And there's also a track featuring Sting, of all people. Red Light, in which Sting just sings parts of Roxanne over some generic house beats. I mean, it's technically not a sample, but it may as well be. And it mostly just made me laugh when it came up. Like, really? That's what you're doing? Now, to be fair, there are more tracks on this album that don't have guest features than those that do. Quite a few regular house cuts that utilize vocal samples and that kind of thing. But that's not to say these are particular winners either. Hell, most of these turned out to be among the lowest points of the album. Some of these sound like they could be leftovers from Steve Angello's solo album back from 2018, Human, which I heard back when it was new, and I primarily remember sounding like watered-down Justice. Take the grating and unpleasant slog of Mafia that sounds like a bunch of oddly predictable industrial whirring going over trap beats or something. Or the overdramatic title track, which is doing its best to sound big and important and epic, but mostly just comes off annoying and blown out and kinda hollow. And other cuts sound like they're borrowing from Disclosure's more recent playbook, and doing it way worse. Like the unnaturally stretched out voice samples on Calling On, which get annoying in record time. Or the bizarre abrupt switch-ups of It Gets Better, which feel like a bunch of random generic house build-ups and beats that don't fit together at all. Or the whirring synths and pitch-down hype voices on Can You Feel It. Was slightly looking forward to that one since I'd heard that was meant as an homage to the house classic by Mr. Fingers. But there's nothing about this that sounds like a Mr. Fingers tribute. It's more like a worse runoff from David Guetta's Jack Back mixtape. I think the shared title is just a coincidence, and if it was actually meant as an homage, then it's a pretty shitty one. I guess the darker beat work of 1930 is okay, but that's just an interlude that kind of blends in the background. I kind of like the down-tempo ambient synth melodies on Another Minute at first, but then these processed vocals come in and they sound weirdly off as if they were AI generated or something. And then the album ends in the saccharine For You, which follows the 4 chords of pop, and all the reverb choruses repeatedly saying the title, which had me thinking they were saying "fuh you," like the Paul McCartney track. Which did in fact make me laugh when the track first started, but then by the end I was just like, okay, whatever. And that's pretty much my thoughts on the album as a whole, just has me like, okay, whatever. I had like no expectations of quality going into this, and I pretty much just got what I thought I was going to get. It's not like ear-bleedingly terrible or anything. This doesn't like make me angry or anything. I just wouldn't really call it good either. As someone who's never had any investment in this group to begin with, I am not in any place to tell how this might go down with the actual core fan base. I could see an argument being made in either direction as either living up to what the fans want out of their music and upholding all the same core values they held up in the past, or letting them down by recontextualizing them within a scene that's moved on from their approach and inadvertently highlighting all their biggest weaknesses. All depends on your taste, I guess. But if you're like me and were never a fan, then this sure as hell isn't going to change your mind. It pretty much just reconfirmed all my previously held opinions on them. For better or worse, Paradise Again is definitely a Swedish House Mafia album, and I'm overall feeling a 4.5 out of 10 on it. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the commenting down there. Oh boy. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You'll want to add yourself to that list. Link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.